Neo-Viridia City, California, glittered under the perpetual haze of innovation, a monument to the digital age. Its skyscrapers, sheathed in chrome and glass, pierced the smoggy sky like crystalline algorithms, their facades reflecting the endless dance of projected advertisements. Every street hummed with the silent glide of autonomous vehicles. Every cafe buzzed with the soft murmur of augmented reality overlays. Life here was meticulously optimized, seamlessly interconnected, and utterly reliant on the invisible currents of data. There was a pervasive sense of efficiency, a relentless pursuit of speed, and a subtle, almost unspoken disdain for anything that dared to be analog or outdated. The city, in its relentless march forward, had little patience for the tactile, the tangible, the slow. At the apex of this digital dominion resided Ethan Vance, a brilliant, arrogant tech billionaire barely past his 30th birthday. He was the CEO of OmniConnect, a company whose name had become synonymous with global data infrastructure, a silent, pervasive network that powered everything from smart grids to interstellar communications. Ethan himself was a product of his empire, sharp, analytical, and utterly dismissive of anything that couldn't be quantified, optimized, or rendered virtually. His penthouse, perched impossibly high above the city's electric thrum, was a temple to minimalism and smart technology. Holographic displays shimmered in the air, reacting to his every gesture. AI assistants anticipated his needs before he even articulated them. His daily routine was a ballet of efficiency virtual meetings conducted with avatars, drone deliveries of nutrient-dense synthesized meals, even his morning coffee printed by a sleek replicator. He rarely touched a physical object that wasn't his latest smart device, his fingers perpetually gliding across smooth, cool screens. Ethan found himself on a reluctantly scheduled Tuesday afternoon, traversing the stark architectural divide of Neo-Viridia. His sleek, self-driving car hummed him away from the gleaming towers of the city's core and into the Old Roots, a neighborhood ironically named for its enduring adherence to traditional structures and its utter lack of digital integration. Here, houses were made of wood and brick, not glass and steel. Gardens flourished in actual soil rather than hydroponic towers. And here, in a small traditional house, lived Arthur Vance, Ethan's grandfather. Arthur, in his late 70s, was a relic in a world obsessed with the new. His life was a quiet, analog counterpoint to his grandson's digital symphony. A retired historian, Arthur was a polymath, his mind a vast, intricate library of human civilization's long, often forgotten history. He had spent decades immersed in the rise and fall of empires, the subtle shifts of cultures, the enduring principles of human ingenuity that predated silicon chips by millennia. His home was a labyrinth of towering bookshelves, overflowing with physical books, ancient tomes, crumbling paperbacks, and meticulously organized hardcovers. The air was thick with the distinct, comforting scent of old paper, leather, and ink, a fragrance alien to Ethan's sterilized environment. Ethan stepped into the house, a faint grimace touching his lips at the subtle scent. He found Arthur, as always, seated at a vast mahogany desk, its surface scarred by countless years of use. Sunlight, unfiltered by smart glass, streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and the clutter of Arthur's world. His grandfather was hunched over a large, leather-bound journal, his gnarled hands gripping an ancient fountain pen, its nib scratching softly across the cream-colored page. Around him lay an organized chaos of other journals, open books, loose papers covered in meticulous script, and an array of strange, old tools that Ethan couldn't even identify. "Grandpa," Ethan began, his voice polite but edged with barely concealed condescension. "Are you still in the Stone Age, I swear? That pen looks like it belongs in a museum." He gestured dismissively at the ink-stained journals. "Why don't you get a tablet? Or better yet, I can get you a cutting-edge data recording system. No more messy ink, no more aching hands." He pulled out his latest smart device, its sleek surface gleaming. "Everything's optimized, searchable, instantly accessible. Why bother with this? He waved his hand at the stacks of paper, a gesture of profound disdain. Arthur looked up. His eyes, though framed by a web of wrinkles, were clear and sharp, possessing a depth that Ethan's own rapid-fire intellect had yet to grasp. He offered a gentle smile. "Ethan, my boy," he said, his voice warm, a comforting baritone that seemed to belong to an older, slower time. "These are not just records. They are a conversation, a connection. The ink, the paper. They endure. They do not flicker and die with a power surge." He gestured to the countless shelves. "Each of these books, each of these journals, is a monument to human resilience, to the permanence of knowledge when it is truly cared for." Ethan scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Permanence, Grandpa. A single server farm holds more data than all the libraries on Earth combined, and it's backed up globally. What could possibly go wrong with that?" His words dripped with an easy confidence, a belief in the infallibility of the digital world he had helped create. He saw his grandfather's methods as quaint, endearing perhaps, but ultimately obsolete. The scene solidified Ethan's belief in digital supremacy and his deep-seated condescension towards the analog world, a world he considered beneath him. Despite Ethan's constant mockery, his subtle digs at Arthur's primitive ways, Arthur always greeted his grandson with genuine warmth. It was a warmth that emanated not just from the old man's easy smile, but from the comforting scent of freshly baked goods that often permeated his home. On this particular visit, as on many others, Arthur presented Ethan with a small, perfectly round, hand-baked cookie, still warm from the oven, its edges golden, its scent of cinnamon and nutmeg a stark contrast to the sterile air of Ethan's penthouse. Ethan took it, a faint flicker of something akin to guilt crossing his face before he quickly masked it. This simple, tangible act of affection was a quiet testament to Arthur's enduring patience and love. Arthur's kindness extended far beyond his immediate family. 3 times a week, he volunteered at the local community library, a small, unassuming building in the Old Roots that had mercifully escaped the digital renovation that swept through the rest of Neo-Viridia. Here, he spent hours with a genuinely curious but often underserved group of local children. They weren't tech-savvy whizzes, but kids fascinated by stories and the tangible world. Arthur would sit amongst them, his voice animated, explaining complex historical concepts with simple, engaging language. He taught them about the ingenious aqueducts of ancient Rome, the intricate navigation techniques of Polynesian voyagers who used stars and currents, the surprising resilience of early human settlements. He shared knowledge that had no digital equivalent, lessons that were drawn from the very tactile experiences of human history, from detailed diagrams drawn directly onto chalkboards, or from ancient, well-worn maps he would unroll for them. One afternoon, a young girl named Maya, whose family was struggling, brought Arthur a delicate, antique porcelain doll. Its head was cracked, its painted face marred, and its once vibrant dress torn. It was her grandmother's, and Maya was heartbroken. Arthur, without a word, took the doll. He spent the next few days meticulously mending it, using fine, almost invisible glue to carefully piece together the porcelain, stitching the tiny tears in the silk dress with threads so fine they seemed to disappear. When he returned it to Maya, the doll was whole, its face beaming under her careful restoration, a quiet testament to his inherent value for tangible, preserved objects, and his deep compassion for those around him. These small, consistent acts of kindness and dedication solidified Arthur's quiet dignity, making him a figure of unwavering moral strength, even in a world that largely overlooked him. Arthur's journals, numbering in the hundreds and meticulously indexed in a sprawling, handwritten ledger, contained not just the expected historical data and academic research. They also held unusual, almost prescient observations that bordered on the enigmatic. Tucked among his detailed analyses of ancient agrarian societies, Ethan had once glimpsed intricate diagrams of cosmic events, meticulous drawings of obscure star charts, and peculiar notations about solar cycles and magnetic resonances. Arthur occasionally referenced a Carrington event, a specific historical solar storm, long before the scientific community had begun discussing such occurrences as a modern threat. He had made cryptic entries about contingency protocols and forgotten wisdom for times of great disruption, details that seemed utterly out of place for a retired historian. It hinted at a deeper, almost prophetic understanding, a foresight that stretched beyond conventional historical analysis into a realm of intuitive cosmic awareness. He also possessed a curious collection of rare, almost unbreakable paper, stored in climate-controlled, fire-resistant boxes in his basement. Ethan had once mocked them as archaic fire hazards, but Arthur had merely smiled, saying, "Some things are worth preserving in their purest form, my boy, for when the currents shift." This seemed like an eccentric hobby, yet it hinted at his meticulous foresight, his almost obsessive dedication to ensuring that knowledge, true knowledge, would endure, no matter what cataclysm befell the increasingly fragile digital world. Elias, in his quiet analog world, was inadvertently preparing for a storm that no one else in Neo-Viridia could even conceive of. His very existence was a seed of mystery, a hidden truth waiting for the inevitable moment when the world would be forced to seek the wisdom it had so carelessly discarded. The world, accustomed to the seamless hum of digital omnipresence, lived in a state of tranquil, almost arrogant certainty. News channels routinely issued perfunctory warnings about solar flares. Academic papers cautiously theorized about their potential impact. But for the average citizen of Neo-Viridia, such cosmic events were distant, theoretical whispers, swallowed by the immediate, comforting glow of their screens. What could possibly halt the relentless march of progress? What could truly disrupt the perfectly synchronized symphony of global data? The answer arrived with the terrifying, silent force of a wave of pure energy. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, a Carrington-level solar flare, a monumental outburst from the sun, erupted. It unleashed an electromagnetic pulse EMP of unprecedented magnitude that, within minutes, swept across the Earth. There was no sound, no visible flash, just a sudden, profound cessation. In that instant, the invisible currents of data that powered the modern world simply ceased to be. In Neo-Viridia City, the collapse was immediate and absolute. The seamless digital world, Ethan Vance's meticulously constructed empire, imploded into silent, terrifying chaos. One moment, autonomous vehicles glided silently through the city streets, their passengers engrossed in holographic displays. The next, they froze mid-route, dead husks blocking intersections, their intricate systems fried by the unseen pulse. Smart buildings, their facades once alive with shimmering projections, went dark. Their automated doors jammed, their climate control systems dead. The vibrant hum of the city died, replaced by an eerie, unsettling silence, punctuated only by the distant, then growing, sounds of confusion and panic, and Ethan's hyper-connected life shattered like glass. He was in his penthouse, mid-virtual meeting, a holographic representation of his latest quarterly projections shimmering before him. One moment. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of his myriad displays. The next, it plunged into a terrifying darkness. The holographic projections flickered, pixelated, and died. His smart lighting system went dark. The hum of the AI assistant fell silent. He tapped frantically at his smart desk, then his tablet, then his phone, all utterly unresponsive. Inert bricks of useless silicon. The familiar icons, the reassuring glow of connectivity, were gone, replaced by a terrifying blank screen. His OmniConnect empire, the very foundation of his identity and unimaginable wealth, crumbled into nothingness in less than a heartbeat. The vast server farms he commanded, the interconnected networks that spanned continents, the cloud storage where trillions of bytes of data resided, all had been rendered into inert, useless metal and plastic. His personal digital records, his financial assets, his carefully curated global contacts, his access to his vast fortune, all were gone, erased as if they had never existed. The city, once a symbol of his power, a testament to his technological prowess, transformed before his eyes into a terrifying landscape of frozen vehicles, dark, unbreathing buildings, and an increasingly palpable, widespread panic. Ethan's initial reaction was a frantic, almost instinctual disbelief. This simply couldn't be happening. He tried to restore connectivity, to reboot, to find a backup. His mind, trained in the rapid problem-solving of the tech world, cycled through every troubleshooting protocol he knew. He rushed to his secure server room, a vault of cutting-edge technology hidden within his penthouse. The server racks, once alive with blinking lights and the gentle hum of cooling fans, were now silent, their indicator lights dead. He opened panel after panel, but the terrifying truth stared back at him empty. Unresponsive screens, the complex circuitry utterly fried. He tried to contact his top engineers, the brilliant minds who could surely fix this, but their personal communicators were dead. He tried every emergency frequency, every redundant satellite link, but all he received was an overwhelming, terrifying static, the sound of nothingness, the raw, visceral reality of his complete helplessness, his utter dependence on the very technology he had mastered, and frankly, exploited, slowly began to sink in. He was a king without a kingdom, a god stripped of his powers. This experience awakened a deep-seated fear he had never known, a profound realization of his own vulnerability, a stark, humiliating contrast to his previous arrogance and unshakable belief in his own technological supremacy. His carefully curated world, so perfectly controlled, had been exposed as fragile, built on an invisible foundation that had simply vanished. As the hours bled into a terrifying, dataless eternity, panic began to spread like wildfire through Neo-Viridia City. The initial bewilderment quickly escalated into widespread fear. Without power, without communication, the intricate web of modern society unraveled with shocking speed. Food delivery systems, reliant on digital orders and automated logistics, failed completely. The sleek, efficient transportation network ground to a halt, leaving millions stranded. Communication became impossible, isolating individuals in a city of millions. News reports, once instantaneous, ceased. The emergency broadcasts that did flicker on were distorted, filled with static, and utterly unhelpful, warning only of unprecedented outages and solar interference. People, once accustomed to immediate gratification and effortless access, quickly grew desperate. The thin veneer of civility began to crack. Whispers of a general evacuation, of designated safe zones, of emergency food distribution centers, spread like wildfire, but without any verifiable source. They quickly devolved into rumors, fueling further panic. The city's digital locks failed, leading to widespread looting as stores and warehouses, once inaccessible, became targets for desperate citizens. The hum of efficiency was replaced by the shouts of panicked crowds, the distant wail of alarms that now sounded eerily primitive, and the shattering of glass. Ethan, stranded and utterly powerless in his dark, silent penthouse, watched the chaos unfold from his lofty perch. He saw the city, a testament to his life's work, descending into anarchy. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He, the architect of the digital age, was now as helpless as the most technologically illiterate person on the planet. He felt a profound, chilling despair. His very identity, so intricately tied to his mastery of technology, had been erased along with the data. It was amidst this terrifying maelstrom that a thought, startling in its anachronism, flickered to life in his mind. Grandfather, his journals. He had mocked them, scorned them as relics of a bygone era. He remembered the ink-stained pages, the ancient fountain pens, the sheer volume of handwritten records. He remembered his dismissive comments, his easy laughter at Arthur's Stone Age habits. Now, with a jolt of desperate, almost humiliating irony, He realized that those despised analog records, those very objects he had considered utterly worthless, might be the only source of data left in the entire city, perhaps the entire world. They contained maps, historical records, practical knowledge, the very things society now desperately needed. His luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of his comfort and power, had become a prison. He couldn't stay. He couldn't survive in this new, analog world without help, without information. His only option, his only hope for survival, for understanding, for direction, was to seek out the old man he so frequently mocked, the man whose very existence was a rebuke to Ethan's digital dogma. His digital kingdom had fallen, crumbled to dust by an unseen cosmic force, and he, the tech billionaire, was now forced to return to the old roots, to the Stone Age, to survive. The journey would be long, perilous, and utterly humiliating, but it was his only path forward. The age of algorithms was over, and the age of ink and paper had, impossibly, returned. The journey from Ethan's darkened penthouse in the heart of Neo-Viridia to the quiet, anachronistic haven of his grandfather's house in the old roots was a harrowing descent into the chaos of a collapsed world. The city, once a symphony of efficiency, was now a cacophony of fear. Automated vehicles lay like scattered metallic corpses, their circuits fried, blocking once smooth avenues. The hushed hum of smart buildings was replaced by the eerie silence of dark glass facades, occasionally punctuated by the distant sounds of shattering glass or desperate shouts. Ethan, for the first time in his life, walked. He navigated unfamiliar back alleys, clambered over abandoned vehicles, and dodged panicked citizens, his expensive shoes becoming scuffed and dusty, his tailored suit a grim mockery of his former status. Every step was a physical manifestation of his humbled state, a forced return to the primitive existence he had so long disdained. Miraculously, Arthur's house, nestled amidst the surviving old-growth trees, seemed untouched by the digital apocalypse. Its sturdy wooden frame and slate roof stood defiantly against the backdrop of silent, darkened towers. There was no hum of generators, no flicker of screens, simply the soft glow of a kerosene lamp emanating from a window. A warm, inviting beacon in a world plunged into darkness. As Ethan approached, he saw a wisp of smoke curling from the chimney, the scent of wood smoke a primal comfort. He pushed open the creaking gate, his hand trembling slightly, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and profound embarrassment washing over him. He found Arthur seated at his sprawling mahogany desk, just as he had been a lifetime ago, or rather, a week ago, before the solar flare had redefined existence. Arthur was calmly annotating a leather-bound journal by the soft glow of the kerosene lamp, his fountain pen scratching rhythmically across the page. The aroma of brewing herbal tea mingled with the comforting scent of old paper and beeswax. Arthur looked up, his eyes meeting Ethan's, not with a triumphant gleam or a knowing smirk, but with a serene understanding. There was no "I told you so," no trace of gloating in his gaze, only a quiet, profound welcome. "Ethan," Arthur said, his voice as steady as the deep roots of the oak trees outside. "Come in, my boy. You look weary. I was just making some chamomile. Helps calm the nerves." He gestured to a worn armchair near the hearth, where a small fire crackled merrily. Ethan, still reeling from the shock and the arduous journey, sank into the chair, the sudden warmth and quiet a stark contrast to the terror he had just endured. He looked at his grandfather, at the familiar surroundings, and felt an overwhelming surge of desperate relief. "Grandpa," he croaked, his voice hoarse, "everything's gone. All of it. The networks, the data, OmniConnect. It's all just dead. The city's chaos. No power, no water, no communication. Nothing works." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Do you have anything, any information? Anything at all that could help? I don't even know how to get food, how to find clean water." His voice, usually so commanding, was now tinged with a raw, almost childlike desperation. Arthur nodded slowly, his gaze compassionate. He understood the depth of Ethan's despair, the profound loss he felt. It is a great unraveling, my boy. But not everything is lost. Knowledge endures, if it is recorded in ways that defy the ephemeral. He reached for a specific journal, its spine worn from countless openings, its pages filled with neat, precise script and intricate hand-drawn diagrams. He opened it to a marked page. "The city's infrastructure," Arthur began, his voice calm, pedagogical, was built in layers. Beneath the gleaming digital facade, the old analog systems still exist, often neglected but robust. He pointed to a beautifully rendered cross-sectional schematic. "Here," he said, tracing a line with his finger, "is the original blueprint for the city's municipal water filtration system, predating the digital upgrades. It's entirely mechanical. There's a manual override, and a series of emergency wells connected to a gravity-fed reservoir, designed for a time before pumps and sensors were ubiquitous. I've updated it with notes on which pipes were replaced with durable, non-digital materials, and which routes are still accessible after decades of urban sprawl." Ethan stared, his mind struggling to comprehend the intricate, hand-drawn schematics. It was a language he barely understood. Gears, valves, pressure gauges, all governed by physical mechanics, not lines of code. "But how do you know this? This isn't public record anymore." Arthur smiled gently. "I made it my business to know. History, Ethan, is not just about the past. It is about understanding the enduring principles that allow civilizations to survive." He turned another page, revealing detailed, hand-drawn illustrations of edible wild plants that grew in the overgrown city parks and along forgotten creek beds, complete with their seasons and preparation methods, primitive hobbies Ethan had once scoffed at. He also possessed a crucial, non-digital map of safe routes out of the city, meticulously updated with notes on potential roadblocks, bridges out, collapsed tunnels, viable emergency shelters, and even hidden caches of supplies established by cautious preppers over the years. Information gleaned from his vast network of similarly minded analog enthusiasts. Where official digital weather data was gone, Arthur had meticulous daily weather logs for the past 50 years, accurate to the precise hour, recorded directly from his own analog instruments, allowing him to predict immediate atmospheric conditions with astonishing accuracy. This was the unveiling of Arthur's true talent. He wasn't just a nostalgic hobbyist, he was a meticulous record keeper, a shrewd observer, and a living, breathing repository of practical, fundamental knowledge, essential for survival in a world stripped bare of its digital comforts. His journals were not just personal diaries. They were an encyclopedia of resilience, a manual for human endurance. Ethan Vance was the sole, bewildered witness. His initial reaction was one of profound shock, quickly followed by a reluctant, almost unwilling awe. He picked up one of the journals, his fingers brushing the rough paper, feeling the raised texture of the ink. It was alien, yet undeniably real. He tried desperately to rationalize how Arthur could possess such vital, real-time, accurate information that defied the global digital blackout. How could an old man, with nothing but pen and paper, hold the keys to a city's survival when his own multi-billion-dollar empire had evaporated? The contrast between his own digital collapse and his grandfather's analog resilience was stark, brutal, and utterly humbling. It forced him to confront the profound limitations of his own technological supremacy and the unexpected enduring value of his grandfather's outdated methods. A dawning, painful truth began to emerge. He had built a kingdom on sand, while his grandfather had quietly been building an ark. News of Arthur's untouched house, his seemingly impossible power, the undisturbed records, and the sudden influx of desperate people seeking his help spread rapidly through the chaotic, post-EMP city. Word traveled not through digital networks, but through word of mouth, desperate whispers, and the frantic footsteps of those seeking solace. Mayor Thompson, a formidable figure known for his ruthless pragmatism and survival-oriented leadership, heard the rumors. Thompson, like many, initially dismissed Arthur as just another prepper, a lucky old man whose eccentric hobbies had inadvertently paid off. He was busy trying to establish order, to centralize resources, to project an image of control in a city spiraling into anarchy. However, as the city descended further into chaos, as supply lines failed and the desperation for reliable information became critical, Thompson began to see Arthur's valuable physical journals not as quaint relics, but as a critical resource, something to be controlled for the greater good of the community. He still didn't fully believe in Arthur's analog magic, but the data, the maps, the historical blueprints, they were undeniably useful. Thompson, a man who understood power dynamics even in a collapsed society, dispatched a small, official-looking but subtly coercive team to Arthur's property. They were composed of former city security personnel and repurposed civic volunteers, armed with the mayor's authority. Their ostensible mission was to secure Arthur's property and confiscate the journals for public distribution, to create a centralized information hub. Their true mission, however, was to centralize control of the only remaining data, to make Arthur and his unique knowledge subservient to the mayor's command. Thompson believed that information was power, and in this new, brutal world, he intended to wield it. As Ethan watched the approaching group, his newly forming appreciation for his grandfather's quiet resilience now mingled with a fierce, protective instinct. The fragile peace in Arthur's analog sanctuary was about to be shattered, and the true battle for the city's future, a battle for information, was about to begin. Arthur's house, once a quiet, unassuming sanctuary in the anachronistic pocket of the old roots, now pulsed with a new, frantic energy. It had transformed, almost overnight, into an unexpected focal point, a last bastion of organized information in a city consumed by digital silence and burgeoning chaos. People, desperate for guidance, for hope, for simply a direction in the new, terrifying analog world, were drawn to it like iron filings to a magnet. They came with questions about forgotten well springs, about safe routes through the gridlocked city, about rudimentary methods for purifying water or identifying edible plants. Questions that only Arthur, with his seemingly endless supply of meticulously recorded knowledge, could answer. His modest home, with its overflowing bookshelves and the comforting scent of old paper, had become the closest thing Neo-Viridia had to a functioning library, a living archive of a past that now held the key to survival. Ethan, initially overwhelmed by the sheer volume of desperate faces and the ceaseless clamor for his grandfather's attention, found himself unexpectedly stepping into a new role. He still felt the sting of his own helplessness, the profound shock of his digital empire crumbling, but a nascent, almost protective instinct stirred within him. He began to organize the influx of people, managing the flow, helping his grandfather navigate the relentless inquiries. He sorted through the journals, his once pristine hands now smudged with ink and dust, learning to decipher Arthur's elegant script, to cross-reference entries, to understand the intricate, interconnected web of analog information. He was still learning, still very much an apprentice in this new world, but his formidable intellect, once directed at algorithms, was now focused on survival, on tangible solutions. But the influx of desperate citizens was only one side of the coin. Mayor Thompson, a figure whose pragmatism bordered on ruthlessness, viewed Arthur's burgeoning influence and, more critically, his vast collection of physical journals with a calculating eye. Thompson, accustomed to centralized control, saw the decentralized knowledge emanating from Arthur's house as a potential threat to the fragile order he was trying to impose. He believed information was power, and in this post-EMP world, Arthur held a monopoly on the most vital commodity. He still harbored a core skepticism about Arthur's old ways, dismissing it as mere luck or coincidence. But the undeniable utility of the journals was clear. He couldn't simply let such a critical resource remain in the hands of one eccentric. Thompson had initially sent his team to secure the journals, a veiled attempt at confiscation. But upon seeing the sheer volume and complexity of Arthur's handwritten records, hundreds of volumes, filled with intricate diagrams, cryptic notations, and a lifetime of accumulated knowledge. His team realized that simply seizing them would be useless. The information wasn't in a database that could be downloaded. It was intertwined with Arthur's memory, his personal indexing system, his unique understanding. So, Thompson resorted to a different tactic. He arrived at Arthur's house himself, flanked by his security detail, his demeanor outwardly polite but subtly menacing. The air in Arthur's crowded living room, usually filled with whispers of hope, grew taut with tension. "Mr. Vance," Thompson began, his voice a low rumble, designed to command attention. "The city appreciates your efforts. Truly. But this is chaos. We need order. We need a unified approach to recovery." He gestured vaguely at the stacks of journals. "These resources are too vital. They belong to the city, to all the people. We need to centralize this information for the greater good." Arthur, his gaze steady, met Thompson's without flinching. "Knowledge, Mayor, is a seed. It grows best when shared freely, not hoarded or controlled." Thompson's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Mr. Vance, we are facing unprecedented times. We cannot afford sentimentality. The city needs a plan, a verifiable, comprehensive plan for immediate survival and long-term recovery. And it needs to come from you, using these journals. The people are growing restless. They need leadership, not anecdotes." He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. "I am issuing an ultimatum. Mr. Vance, you will present such a plan to the entire community, derived solely from these records, within 24 hours. If you fail, my team will be forced to take these journals and attempt to disseminate the information ourselves, regardless of the chaos that may cause." The ultimatum was a cold, calculated trap. Thompson knew the immense complexity of the task, the sheer volume of information that Arthur would have to distill and organize in such a short time frame, all while under immense pressure. It was designed to expose Arthur's methods as impractical, to portray him as an unreliable source, thereby justifying the forceful seizure of his invaluable archives. As if the pressure of the deadline weren't enough, a new, critical crisis erupted. Reports, relayed by desperate citizens and confirmed by Thompson's limited analog reconnaissance, began to filter in the city's main reservoir. Once a gleaming symbol of modern engineering, was compromised. A crucial section of the primary intake pipe, deep underground and unseen, had suffered a catastrophic failure during the EMP event, or perhaps been sabotaged in the immediate chaos. Contamination. A major pipe burst, whatever the cause. The city's primary water source was rapidly becoming unusable. A ticking clock for a fresh water supply had begun. Thompson, visibly agitated, announced the crisis to the assembled crowd, deliberately highlighting the desperate urgency. "We have hours, not days, before thirst becomes the greatest threat. We need a solution. Now." This was a crisis that only detailed historical knowledge of the old city's forgotten infrastructure, the kind of knowledge meticulously recorded only in Arthur's journals, could solve. The pressure on Arthur intensified tenfold. He looked at the faces of the desperate citizens, then at Thompson's unyielding gaze. He was being forced to unveil his true talent, his deep, interconnected knowledge of pre-digital systems under the most extreme duress imaginable. It wasn't just about sharing information anymore. It was about demonstrating its immediate, life-saving utility. Ethan, standing beside his grandfather, felt a surge of raw, protective anger. He saw Thompson's cruel calculation, the blatant attempt to exploit Arthur's wisdom. He also saw the fear in the eyes of the people, the dawning horror of a waterless future. He looked at Arthur, at the unwavering calm in the old man's eyes, and understood. This wasn't just Arthur's burden, it was theirs. The crowd around the house grew, the tension palpable, a mixture of hope and rising despair. Arthur, ignoring the immediate chaos, began to pull specific journals from his shelves, his fingers moving with an instinctive knowledge honed by decades of meticulous record-keeping. He spread them out on his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan, overcoming his own ingrained arrogance, knelt beside him, ready to assist. His pride, his tech billionaire identity, had been utterly obliterated. All that remained was a desperate need to help, to learn, to contribute. He began to transcribe Arthur's hurried notes, to mark pages, to follow his grandfather's every command with a newfound humility. The battle for Neo Viridia's survival would be fought not with code or circuits, but with ink, paper, and the quiet resilience of forgotten knowledge. Arthur, in his besieged archive, stood alone, the last beacon of hope in a city plunged into a terrifying, analog dark age. The 24-hour deadline loomed, a suffocating weight upon Arthur's shoulders. The relentless ticks of the grandfather clock in his hall were amplified by the growing silence of a city slowly dying of thirst. The crisis at the main reservoir had intensified. Mayor Thompson's dire warnings were no exaggeration. Without potable water, Neo Viridia, once a beacon of technological prowess, was rapidly devolving into a parched, desperate wasteland. The air crackled not with digital signals, but with the visceral fear of dehydration. Ethan, now covered in sweat and grime, moved with a frantic energy beside Arthur, his earlier arrogance entirely stripped away, replaced by a desperate humility. He was no longer mocking. He was learning, absorbing every word, every gesture. As Arthur meticulously navigated the labyrinthine knowledge contained within his journals. "The old Northridge pumping station," Arthur murmured, tracing a faded, hand-drawn map with his ink-stained finger. "Built in 1920, fully mechanical, gravity-fed for emergency use. It bypasses the main digital filtration, but it needs to be manually primed. The schematics are in volume 37 under municipal infrastructure, pre-40s. And then there's the forgotten aqueduct, a secondary line, hand-dug, running from the natural springs in the Foothills Preserve. I noted its access points in volume 12, geological surveys, local springs. Their mission was clear, yet daunting. They had to locate and activate one of these forgotten analog water sources, a task made infinitely more perilous by the chaotic, crumbling city that separated them from their goal. Arthur, his movements deliberate, his eyes sharp, became the expedition leader. Ethan, now his eager apprentice, gathered essential tools from Arthur's well-stocked shed, sturdy wrenches, thick ropes, and old-fashioned lanterns. They were joined by a small, trusted group, Dr. Lena Petrova, a pragmatic hydrologist who, initially a skeptic of Arthur's unconventional wisdom, had seen enough to now follow his lead with a quiet, scientific curiosity, and a few resilient local community leaders from the old roots, their faces grim but determined. This was a physical race against the complete collapse of essential services and the imminent widespread panic that thirst would inevitably bring. Their journey through Neo Viridia was a stark illustration of the EMP's devastating impact. Streets were choked with abandoned, gleaming vehicles, their forms distorted by the chaotic struggle that had accompanied the blackout. Buildings loomed, silent and dark, like mausoleums to a lost age. The air, heavy with the scent of uncollected refuse and desperation, hummed with a primal tension. They navigated by Arthur's meticulous hand-drawn maps, bypassing routes blocked by frozen cars or desperate looters. Arthur's knowledge of the city's forgotten nooks and crannies, of shortcuts only known to old-timers and historical cartographers, proved invaluable. Ethan, once reliant on GPS, found himself trusting the subtle shifts in the road, the faded landmarks, guided by his grandfather's uncanny memory. They chose to aim for the Northridge pumping station first. As Arthur's journals indicated, it was the larger, more reliable source. It was a long, arduous trek, made worse by the oppressive heat and the growing thirst that gnawed at their throats. They encountered desperate groups of people, some bewildered, some aggressive. But the calm authority that emanated from Arthur, combined with Ethan's unexpected leadership in managing the group, kept them safe. Dr. Petrova, constantly consulting Arthur's hydrological notes, confirmed the feasibility of his plan, her scientific training now complementing his historical insight. Finally, after hours of relentless travel, they arrived at the old North Ridge pumping station. It was a dilapidated, brick building, overgrown with ivy, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, almost entirely swallowed by encroaching urban decay. Its rusty iron gate hung precariously, a stark contrast to the sleek modern infrastructure that had once defined Neo-Viridia. It seemed utterly beyond repair, a relic from a bygone era that had no place in the future. The surrounding area was deserted, eerie in its silence, perhaps avoided due to its obscurity, or perhaps the lurking threat of desperate looters. Inside, the pump house was a mess of rusted pipes, cobwebs, and disused machinery. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Arthur, unperturbed, consulted his journal, its pages now open to a detailed schematic of the old pump's internal workings. "Here," he instructed, pointing to a series of massive, ancient valves. "These need to be opened in a specific sequence to prime the gravity feed. The main pressure valve is here, behind this panel." The main pressure valve was a monstrous, rusted wheel, stubbornly fused to its housing. Ethan, his muscles aching, tried to turn it, grunting with effort, but it wouldn't budge. He felt the cold, creeping despair once more. All this way, all this hope, only to be stopped by a rusted piece of metal. Dr. Petrova, usually so composed, looked grim. "It's been too long, Mr. Vance. The system's seized up. We might need heavy machinery, and we don't have it." This was the held breath moment. The city, outside, was a silent tomb. The faces of their small group, illuminated by the dim lantern light, were etched with desperation. Thirst was becoming unbearable, a searing fire in their throats. It seemed all was lost. The last hopes dwindled, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of their resolve. Arthur, however, did not falter. His eyes, usually so gentle, now held a deep, unwavering intensity. He looked at the rusted valve, then back at his journal. "Wait," he murmured, his finger tracing a seemingly innocuous notation in the margin of the blueprint. "There's an older method, a counter-pressure release. My great-grandfather, a civil engineer, noted it for extreme seizing. It's a forgotten historical detail, a common problem in the early days of these systems. The digital manuals would have erased this inefficient workaround." He pointed to a small, almost invisible bolt on the side of the main valve housing, obscured by layers of grime. "This bolt, loosened precisely 3 turns, will release the internal pressure seal." Ethan, skepticism battling with desperate hope, grabbed a wrench. He knelt, his hand shaking slightly, and meticulously worked the bolt. 1 turn, 2 turns. On the 3rd turn, with a deep, shuddering groan that reverberated through the entire structure, the massive rusted wheel began to slowly, agonizingly, turn. A rush of air, then a high-pitched whine, followed by a sudden, violent shuddering of the pipes. Then, a groaning sound, a deep, resonant rumble from below, and finally, a clear, unmistakable gush of fresh, potable water, cascading into makeshift containers they had brought. The sound was a symphony of salvation, a melody of hope. The water was cool, clean, and pure. They drank deeply, the life-giving liquid washing away their fear and exhaustion. Arthur's quiet, analog wisdom had delivered. The climax culminated hours later at a makeshift assembly point, the central plaza of the old routes, a large open park that had become a gathering place for the community. Mayor Thompson, his face grim, was addressing a large, desperate, and potentially unruly crowd. He spoke of dwindling resources, of the need for tough decisions, and of his growing skepticism regarding any immediate solution. He was about to declare Arthur's plan a failure and seize the journals. Just as he expressed his doubt, Arthur arrived. He was not alone. Ethan, transformed from a tech titan to a pragmatic leader, walked proudly beside him, carrying a bucket of the freshly purified water. Behind them followed Dr. Petrova, confirming its potability, and the community leaders, their faces beaming with relief. A hush fell over the crowd as they saw the water. Arthur, with quiet authority, stepped forward. He didn't shout, didn't gloat. He simply held up a volume of his journals. "The city has water," he announced, his voice steady, clear, projecting across the stunned crowd. "And it has a future. Not because of lost technology, but because of enduring knowledge." He then presented a step-by-step plan for the city's immediate recovery, drawn directly from his analog records. He unrolled meticulously hand-drawn maps of other functioning analog infrastructure, forgotten power conduits, alternative sewer systems, even blueprints for communal, hand-cranked generators. He outlined plans for immediate community gardens based on detailed historical agricultural practices, identifying specific locations and native plant species resilient to urban conditions. Ethan, having witnessed Arthur's knowledge firsthand, stepped forward. He stood beside his grandfather, not as the arrogant billionaire, but as a humbled disciple. His voice, once dismissive, now spoke with profound respect. "My grandfather's journals," Ethan said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, "contain not just history, but a roadmap. They show us how to rebuild, not by relying on fragile digital pulses, but on fundamental principles of engineering, sustainability, and human resilience. This is the only reliable data left. It's not about recreating the past, it's about learning from it, to build a truly resilient future." The crowd, initially suspicious, then astonished by the clean water and the tangible plans, erupted. A tumultuous wave of relief washed over them, followed by overwhelming admiration. Cheers erupted, chants of "Arthur, Arthur" echoing through the plaza. Mayor Thompson, his face initially grim, now showed profound awe and humility. He looked at Arthur, then at the gushing water, and finally at the sea of grateful faces. Arthur's quiet, analog wisdom had not only saved lives, but had provided the only viable roadmap to a sustainable future, a future rooted in the resilience of human ingenuity and the enduring power of knowledge preserved. The tide of despair that had threatened to engulf Neo-Viridia City receded, replaced by a cautious, then soaring, wave of hope. Mayor Thompson, witnessing Arthur's undeniable triumph in securing the city's water supply and presenting a comprehensive plan for survival, was utterly humbled. His initial pragmatism, once a cold, calculating force, transformed into genuine respect and, surprisingly, a deep sense of admiration. He had seen firsthand the fragility of his digital empire and the unyielding strength of Arthur's analog wisdom. Thompson stood before the assembled community, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We made a mistake," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the people, then resting on Arthur. "We placed all our faith in systems that ultimately failed us. Mr. Arthur Vance, his knowledge, his foresight, he has shown us the true path forward." He publicly acknowledged his grave misjudgment, his previous attempts to dismiss and even control Arthur. From that day forward, Thompson worked tirelessly to implement Arthur's recovery plan, realizing that centralized digital control was a false idol. He used his remaining authority, not to command, but to facilitate, becoming Arthur's steadfast advocate and a crucial helper in the daunting task of rebuilding. He ensured that Arthur's property remained protected, that resources were channeled to support his initiatives, and that the newfound appreciation for analog knowledge permeated every aspect of the nascent community. The citizens of Neo-Viridia, their faces once etched with fear, now wore expressions of profound gratitude and a newfound appreciation for manual skills and traditional knowledge. They flocked to Arthur's house, no longer with demands, but with offers of assistance, eager to learn. Neighbors, who had once offered only polite but dismissive nods, now brought him fresh produce from their newly planted community gardens, offered to help him organize his vast collection of journals, or simply sat quietly, absorbing his stories and wisdom. The house hummed with activity, a bustling hub of learning and collaboration. The children, once enchanted but ultimately dismissive of his fairy tales, were now utterly captivated. They returned to Arthur's side, no longer to laugh, but to beg for lessons on journaling, on rudimentary carpentry, on identifying plants. Arthur, with his characteristic patience, taught them the old ways, how to mend what was broken, how to live in harmony with the natural world, how to think critically without the aid of screens. He showed them how to distinguish edible berries from poisonous ones, how to tie intricate knots, how to sharpen tools by hand. He taught them the joy of creation with their hands, and the enduring power of knowledge that resided not in a cloud, but within the pages of a book, or in the practiced skill of a craftsperson. For Arthur, there was no position in the traditional sense, for the old systems of corporate hierarchies and digital titles no longer existed. Instead, by popular acclaim and the sheer force of his irreplaceable knowledge, he became the de facto archivist of resilience and chief advisor for the community. His house, with its thousands of books and journals, was officially designated as the central living library and archive of the revitalized Neo-Viridia. He was not just a source of information. He was a living library, a repository of practical, fundamental wisdom that guided every step of their daunting rebuilding efforts. He advised on everything from the construction of rudimentary water filtration systems to the establishment of decentralized power grids fueled by salvaged analog machinery. Ethan, once the architect of a digital empire, was now entirely stripped of his previous identity as a tech magnate. The tailored suits were replaced by practical, durable work clothes. His hands, once accustomed only to the smooth glide of screens, were now calloused, perpetually smudged with grease and ink. He dedicated himself entirely to learning from Arthur, becoming his diligent apprentice, his most ardent student. He spent countless hours by his grandfather's side, poring over journals, meticulously transcribing crucial information onto new, durable paper, helping to organize the growing collection of analog data, and disseminating vital instructions to the various community groups. His brilliant mind, once focused on algorithms and market dominance, now applied itself to analog solutions, designing robust, non-digital communication systems using salvaged radio parts, creating community-based education programs based on Arthur's journals, and teaching practical skills to anyone willing to learn. Their relationship, once strained by the vast chasm between their respective worlds, was undergoing a profound transformation. The condescension and mockery had vanished, replaced by a deep, mutual respect and a burgeoning love that transcended their generational and ideological differences. They found a common purpose that utterly transcended their past differences, a shared mission to rebuild not just the city, but the very fabric of human connection and resilience. They were no longer grandfather and grandson defined by their opposing views, but partners, united by the shared experience of loss and the urgent need to forge a new future. Weeks later, a quiet hum of purposeful activity filled the community hub, a revitalized old schoolhouse, its windows now beaming with the warm, steady glow of hand-cranked lamps. A large, sturdy communal table stood at its center, laden with maps and journals. Arthur and Ethan sat side by side, overseeing the busy scene. The air was thick with the comforting scent of wood smoke and the faint aroma of freshly brewed, real coffee. Ethan, his hands now rough from manual labor, carefully made an entry in a fresh journal, its pages crisp and clean. He looked at the vast shelf of Arthur's hundreds of journals, neatly organized, each spine a testament to enduring knowledge. "Grandfather," he began, his voice low, tinged with a humility he had never known before. "I spent my entire life building a world that vanished in an instant. All my algorithms, all my data, the very foundation of my empire, worthless. They were nothing more than fragile ghosts in the machine. But your ink, your paper, these books, they held the future. They are the only true record left." He paused, a profound realization dawning in his eyes. We built too high and forgot how to look down, didn't we? Arthur smiled, his eyes warm, holding Ethan's gaze. Technology, Ethan, is a tool. A powerful one, yes. But wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what truly matters and how to preserve it in whatever form it takes. We chased speed and efficiency, and in doing so, we placed all our eggs in one very fragile, digital basket. This isn't a step backward, my boy, Arthur said, his voice imbued with a quiet, profound certainty. This is a step toward true resilience. It is a step toward truly understanding what it means to be human and how to survive, not just thrive, on this planet. The shared silence between them was one of understanding, of acceptance, of a newfound connection forged in the crucible of chaos. They had lost everything, but in doing so, they had found each other, and the enduring power of a different kind of progress. 5 years later, Neo-Viridia City was no longer the gleaming, hyper-digital metropolis it had once been, nor was it the desolate wasteland it had briefly become. It had been largely rebuilt, not as a nostalgic recreation of its past, but as a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. The new Neo-Viridia was a remarkable analog hybrid community, a vibrant tapestry woven from robust, simpler technologies and meticulously maintained manual systems. The incessant hum of server farms and the constant glow of digital screens had been replaced by the quiet whir of wind turbines, the gentle clatter of hand-cranked generators, and the earthy sense of widespread community gardens flourishing on what were once manicured lawns. Communication was primarily face-to-face, or via basic, robust analog radios that crackled with reassuring static. There was a newfound appreciation for self-sufficiency, for tangible skills, and for the enduring power of human connection, a profound shift from the fragile dependency of the digital age. Arthur Vance, now in his early 80s, remained the undisputed patriarch of this new society. His wisdom, once dismissed, was now actively sought by all. His house, the original bastion of resilience, had become more than just a home. It was a living museum in the central community archive. People flocked there not just for information, but to learn how to preserve knowledge themselves, to master practical skills, and to understand the historical cycles that had shaped humanity. Arthur, with his calm demeanor and endless patience, was the chief instructor, guiding the community in cultivating resilient food sources, crafting sturdy tools, and establishing decentralized, self-sufficient energy systems, all meticulously documented in his ever-growing collection of hand-bound journals. Ethan, transformed from a tech billionaire into a pragmatic, hands-on leader, had found a purpose far more profound than any he had known in his previous life. He still possessed his brilliant mind, but now applied it to analog solutions. He designed robust, non-digital infrastructure, drawing on Arthur's historical blueprints to create water purification systems that relied on gravity and filtration rather than complex electronics. He spearheaded the establishment of community-based education programs, directly derived from the practical wisdom found in Arthur's journals, teaching everything from basic mechanics to sustainable agriculture. His once obsessive drive for technological dominance had morphed into a dedication to ensuring humanity's long-term survival, inspired by the very history he had once mocked. His relationship with Arthur was one of profound respect, deep love, and a shared, unwavering commitment to the future. They were no longer just grandfather and grandson. They were the guardians of a new, more resilient way of life. The ripple effect of Arthur's and Ethan's work extended far beyond Neo-Viridia. With Ethan's organizational skills and Arthur's unparalleled knowledge, they established the Resilience Archive, a global initiative dedicated to promoting analog record-keeping, practical survival skills, and community self-sufficiency in a post-digital world. They traveled, not in private jets, but via simpler, analog means of transport, sturdy land vehicles powered by biofuel, or wind-powered sailing ships when crossing oceans. They visited isolated communities and struggling towns, teaching them how to create their own local, physical archives of essential knowledge, agricultural techniques, medicinal plant guides, engineering principles, and methods for preserving historical and cultural memory without reliance on fragile digital infrastructure. Ethan, utilizing his remaining intellect and resources, developed open-source, easily replicable designs for manual tools, simple communication devices, and robust, non-digital technologies. He disseminated these designs through meticulously printed manuals, hand-drawn blueprints, and word-of-mouth networks, empowering communities to build their own resilient futures. He dedicated his life to ensuring that humanity would never again become so utterly dependent on a single, vulnerable infrastructure, a lesson etched into his very soul by the great EMP. His legacy was no longer about limitless data, but about enduring knowledge. The story ends in the heart of the revitalized Neo-Viridia city, in a communal building that had once been a bustling, digitally connected public library. Now, it was a thriving hub of human interaction and tangible learning, illuminated by the warm glow of hand-cranked lamps. Arthur and Ethan sat side by side at a large, communal wooden table, its surface scarred with the honest marks of daily use. Around them, the rhythm of learning filled the air. Children, their faces bright with curiosity, meticulously drew diagrams of water wheels and composting systems in their own personal journals, their hands developing skills that had almost been lost. Adults, their brows furrowed in concentration, pored over hand-bound books on sustainable agriculture, basic electrical engineering analog systems, and historical textile production. Arthur, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a profound sense of fulfillment, handed a young child a fresh, blank journal made from recycled paper and a simple, yet elegant, fountain pen. The child, instead of looking confused by the unfamiliar objects, smiled, eager to make their first ink-stained mark. Ethan, his own journal open beside him, made a careful entry, sketching a schematic for a new, robust wind-powered generator. His hand movements were fluid and confident, a stark contrast to the hesitant uncertainty of 5 years prior. The room was filled with the soft scratching of pens on paper, the occasional rustle of turning pages, and the low murmur of shared knowledge, a quiet symphony of resilience, a tangible promise of a future built not on fragile digital pulses, but on enduring human connection, practical wisdom, and the timeless power of knowledge, meticulously recorded and cherished. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that true progress lies not just in advancing forward, but in remembering the enduring lessons of the past, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.